laughter echoed through the empty pediatric ward, a sound that had no place in a hospital at 3 a.m. I froze, my hand clutching the medication cart, as the cheerful giggle danced down the dimly lit corridor. My name is Sarah, and I've been a night nurse at Mercy General for 5 years. I thought I'd seen it all, coding patients, full moons that brought out the crazies, even a few miraculous recoveries. But nothing prepared me for that night. The pediatric ward had been empty for weeks. A pipe burst had flooded the wing, forcing us to relocate our young patients to other floors. Repairs were still underway, leaving the ward a maze of plastic sheets and the acrid smell of fresh paint. I was doing my usual rounds, my shoes squeaking softly on the freshly waxed floors. The medication cart rattled softly as I pushed it, the sound uncomfortably loud in the silence. That's when I first heard it, a light, airy giggle that sent shivers down my spine. I paused, straining my ears. Surely, I was imagining things. Sleep deprivation could do that to you, especially on the night shift. But there it was again, louder this time, followed by the pitter-patter of small feet. "Hello," I called out, my voice wavering more than I'd like to admit. "Is someone there?" Silence answered me, broken only by the steady hum of the air conditioning. I shook my head, trying to clear it. "Get it together, Sarah," I thought. "There's no one here." I continued my rounds, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that clung to me like a second skin. As I approached the nurse's station, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There, on the freshly waxed floor, was a trail of small, wet footprints. My heart pounded in my chest as I followed the prints with my eyes. They led from the middle of the hallway to a closed door at the end, a storage closet that should have been locked. I stood there, frozen, my mind racing. Should I call security? But what would I say? That I heard a child's laughter in an empty ward and found mysterious footprints? They'd think I was losing it. Taking a deep breath, I decided to investigate. I was a professional, after all. If there was a child somehow loose in the hospital, I needed to find them. I approached the door slowly, my footsteps eerily silent compared to the phantom sounds I'd heard earlier. The footprints stopped right at the threshold, as if their owner had vanished into thin air. My hand trembled as I reached for the doorknob. It was cold to the touch, unusually so. I turned it slowly, half expecting it to be locked. It wasn't. The door swung open with a soft creak, revealing nothing, just an ordinary storage closet, filled with shelves of supplies and a faint smell of disinfectant. No child. No explanation for the footprints or the laughter. I let out a shaky breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "See," I told myself, "there's nothing here. You're just tired." I was about to close the door when I felt it, a small, cold hand grasping mine. I screamed, yanking my hand away and stumbling backwards. My heart was racing so fast, I thought it might burst out of my chest. I looked down, expecting to see, I don't know what, but there was nothing there, and yet I could still feel it. The lingering sensation of tiny, ice-cold fingers wrapped around my own. I ran. I'm not proud of it, but in that moment, all my years of training and experience went out the window. I ran like I've never run before, my shoes slapping against the floor, echoing through the empty hallways. I didn't stop until I reached the elevator, jabbing the button frantically. As the door slid shut, I caught a glimpse of something down the hall, a small, shadowy figure standing by the storage closet. Then the elevator descended, and I was alone with my pounding heart and racing thoughts. The rest of the shift was a blur. I went through the motions, checking on patients and administering medications, all while trying to convince myself that what I'd experienced wasn't real. By the time dawn broke, casting a pale light through the hospital windows, I'd almost succeeded. Almost. As I was preparing to leave, Maggie, the day shift charge nurse, approached me. "Hey, Sarah, rough night?" she asked, concern evident in her voice. I must have looked worse than I thought. "You could say that," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Hey, Maggie, has anyone ever mentioned anything strange about the pediatric ward?" Maggie's brow furrowed. "Strange how?" I hesitated, not wanting to sound crazy. "Oh, you know, weird noises, things like that." Maggie was quiet for a moment, and I saw something flicker across her face. Recognition? Fear? But it was gone as quickly as it appeared. "Not that I know of," she said, her tone a little too casual. "Why do you ask?" I shrugged, trying to appear nonchalant. "No reason. Just curious." Maggie nodded, but I could tell she didn't believe me. As I turned to leave, she called out, "Sarah, be careful up there, okay?" I looked back at her, a chill running down my spine. "What do you mean?" She opened her mouth as if to say something, then seemed to think better of it. "Nothing. Just take care of yourself." I left the hospital that morning with more questions than answers, the memory of that cold, small hand still lingering on my skin. Over the next few weeks, I couldn't shake what had happened. I requested a transfer to a different floor, but until it was approved, I still had to work in the pediatric ward. Each night, I'd start my shift with a sense of dread, jumping at every sound, every shadow. But nothing happened. No laughter, no footprints, no ghostly touches. I started to convince myself that it had all been in my head, a vivid hallucination brought on by stress and lack of sleep. Then came the night that changed everything. I was nearing the end of my shift, looking forward to going home and crawling into bed. As I was doing my final rounds, I heard it again, that same childish giggle, echoing through the empty ward. My whole body tensed. Not again, I thought. Please, not again. But there it was, louder this time, followed by the unmistakable sound of running feet. I turned, my heart in my throat, and saw a small figure dart around the corner at the end of the hall. Without thinking, I ran after it. "Wait!" I called out, my voice echoing off the walls. I rounded the corner and skidded to a stop. There, in the middle of the hallway, stood a little girl. She was wearing a hospital gown, her dark hair hanging in damp curls around her pale face. Her feet were bare and wet, leaving small puddles on the floor. "Hello," she said, her voice soft and sweet. "I've been waiting for you, Sarah." I stood there, frozen, unable to comprehend what I was seeing. This can't be real, I told myself. But I could hear her breathing, see the way the dim light cast shadows on her face. Who are you?" I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. The girl smiled, and there was something off about it. Too wide, too knowing for a child her age. "I'm Lucy," she said. "I've been here for a very long time." I took a step back, my nurse's instincts finally kicking in. "Are you lost, Lucy? Do you need help finding your parents?" Lucy's smile faded, replaced by a look of profound sadness. "My parents left a long time ago. They don't come to visit anymore." My heart ached for her, this lost little girl. Despite my fear, I found myself wanting to help her. "I'm sorry to hear that, Lucy. Is there someone I can call for you?" She shook her head, water droplets flying from her hair. "No one can help me now, but maybe I can help you." Before I could ask what she meant, Lucy turned and ran down the hallway. "Wait!" I called out, chasing after her. She led me to a part of the ward I'd never been to before, a section that had been closed off for as long as I'd worked there. The door was ajar, and Lucy slipped through it easily. I hesitated at the threshold. Every instinct was screaming at me to turn back, to run, to call for help. But I couldn't leave her alone in there. Taking a deep breath, I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was dark, the air heavy with the scent of mold and decay. As my eyes adjusted to the gloom, I realized I was standing in an old patient room, one that looked like it hadn't been used in decades. Lucy stood by the window, her outline barely visible in the faint light filtering through the grimy glass. "This was my room," she said softly. "I died here a long time ago." A chill ran through me as the reality of the situation hit me. This wasn't a lost child. This was something else entirely. "I'm sorry," I whispered, not knowing what else to say. Lucy turned to me, her eyes shining in the darkness. "Don't be sorry, Sarah. I'm not. Being here, it's not so bad, but it does get lonely sometimes." She took a step towards me, and I found myself rooted to the spot, unable to move. "That's why I called out to you," she continued. "I've watched you, Sarah. You're kind. You care about the children here. I thought maybe you'd understand." I swallowed hard, trying to find my voice. "Understand what, Lucy?" She was right in front of me now, close enough that I could feel the unnatural cold radiating from her small body. That sometimes the lines between life and death aren't as clear as people think. That sometimes those of us on this side need help too. I felt her cold hand slip into mine, just like that first night. But this time, I didn't pull away. Instead, I knelt down, bringing myself to her eye level. "What do you need, Lucy?" I asked, surprised by the steadiness of my voice. She smiled, a real smile this time, full of hope and gratitude. "Just someone to talk to sometimes. Someone who isn't afraid. Can you do that, Sarah?" I looked into her eyes, seeing not a ghost or a frightening apparition, but a lonely child who had been trapped here for far too long. In that moment, all my fear melted away, replaced by a deep sense of compassion. "Yes," I said, squeezing her tiny hand gently. "Yes, I can do that." From that night on, my shifts in the pediatric ward were never the same. The empty halls were no longer a source of dread, but a place where I could offer comfort to a soul that had been overlooked for too long. I never told anyone about Lucy. Who would believe me? But on quiet nights, when the ward was empty and the moon cast long shadows through the windows, I would hear a familiar giggle, and I would smile, knowing that in this hospital, in this space between worlds, I had found an unlikely friend. The figure on the CCTV stood motionless, a dark silhouette against the stark white tiles of the empty mall. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and looked again. Still there, same spot, same eerie stillness. This was a third night in a row, and I was starting to think I was losing my mind. My name's Mike, and I've been working security at Pinewood Mall for the better part of a decade. Night shift, of course. It's usually a quiet gig, perfect for a guy like me who prefers the company of silence to the chaos of daytime crowds. But lately, things have been different. It started on a Tuesday. I remember because I had just settled into my chair with a fresh cup of coffee, ready for another uneventful night of staring at screens and making my hourly rounds. The mall had been closed for about an hour, and the last of the cleaning crew had just left. I was alone, or so I thought. That's when I first noticed it. A dark figure, standing perfectly still in front of the fountain on the ground floor. At first, I thought it was a mannequin left out by one of the shop owners. But something about it seemed off. It was too organic, too present. I radioed into dispatch, just to be sure. "Hey, Jenny, can you confirm all personnel are out of the building?" Jenny's voice crackled back, tinged with confusion. Yeah, Mike. Last cleaner checked out at 10:15. "Why, what's up?" I hesitated, my eyes still fixed on the motionless figure. "Probably nothing. Just thought I saw something on the cameras. I'll check it out." I grabbed my flashlight and headed down to the main concourse. The mall was eerily quiet, my footsteps echoing off the high ceilings and polished floors. As I approached the fountain, my heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. But there was nothing there. No figure, no person, not even a stray piece of litter. I did a thorough sweep of the area, checking behind planters and in nearby storefronts. Nothing. Puzzled, I returned to the security office. To my shock, the figure was back on the screen in the exact same spot. I rubbed my eyes, certain I was seeing things. But no! There it was, clear as day on the CCTV. I spent the rest of that shift obsessively watching that screen, but the figure never moved. When I went to check in person, it vanished. As soon as I returned to the office, it reappeared on the camera. It was like some twisted game of red light, green light. The next night was the same, and the next, always in the same spot, always vanishing when I went to investigate. I started to dread coming to work, my mind racing with possibilities. Was I going crazy? Was someone playing an elaborate prank? Or was there something more sinister at play? I didn't tell anyone about it. Who would believe me? A security guard seeing ghosts on the cameras? I'd be laughed out of the job. So I kept it to myself, watching and waiting, growing more anxious with each passing night. Then came the night that changed everything. It started like the others. I arrived for my shift, nodded to the day guard as he left, and settled into my chair. Almost immediately, my eyes were drawn to that familiar screen. The figure was there, as always, a dark blot against the white tiles. I sighed, resigning myself to another night of this strange vigil. But then, something changed. The figure moved. It was subtle at first, a slight turn of the head. So small I thought I might have imagined it. But then it happened again, more pronounced this time. The figure was turning, slowly but deliberately, to face the camera. My blood ran cold. In all the nights I'd been watching, it had never so much as twitched. Now, it was moving with purpose, and somehow, I knew it was aware of me. I watched, transfixed, as the figure began to walk. Its movements were jerky, unnatural, like a marionette being pulled by invisible strings. It moved away from the fountain, heading towards the north wing of the mall. Without thinking, I grabbed my radio and flashlight and rushed out of the office. Part of me was screaming to stay put, to call for backup, to do anything but confront whatever this thing was. But a larger part, fueled by nights of fear and uncertainty, needed to know the truth. I ran down the escalator, my footsteps thundering in the empty mall. As I reached the main concourse, I skidded to a stop, my flashlight beam dancing wildly across the storefronts. There was no sign of the figure. "Hello," I called out, my voice echoing back at me. "This is security. Show yourself." Silence was my only answer. I moved cautiously down the corridor, my senses on high alert. Every shadow seemed to move. Every reflection in the darkened shop windows looked like a face. I reached the spot where I'd last seen the figure on the camera. Nothing, not a trace. I was about to turn back when I heard it, a soft, shuffling sound coming from the corridor to my left. My heart pounding, I swung my flashlight in that direction. For a split second, I caught a glimpse of something dark disappearing around the corner. Without hesitation, I gave chase. I ran down the corridor, my flashlight beam bouncing wildly off the walls. I could hear the shuffling ahead of me, always just out of sight. Left turn, right turn, past darkened storefronts and silent kiosks. It felt like I was in a maze, chasing a shadow. Finally, I burst through a set of double doors and found myself in the food court. My flashlight swept across the empty tables and chairs, searching for any sign of movement. There, in the far corner, I saw it. The figure stood with its back to me, a dark silhouette against the large windows that looked out over the parking lot. It was perfectly still again, as if waiting. "Hey!" I shouted, my voice cracking slightly. "Turn around slowly and put your hands where I can see them." Slowly. So slowly it seemed to take an eternity. The figure began to turn. I raised my flashlight, ready to illuminate whoever or whatever I was dealing with. But as the beam hit the figure, I realized with horror that there was nothing to illuminate. The flashlight passed right through it, as if it were made of smoke. Yet it continued to turn, facing me with a featureless void where a face should have been. I stumbled backward, my mind reeling. This couldn't be real. It had to be a trick, a hallucination, anything but what it appeared to be. The figure took a step towards me, then another. Its movements were smooth now, gliding across the floor without a sound. I wanted to run, to scream, to do anything, but I was frozen in place, my eyes locked on the approaching apparition. It stopped just a few feet away from me. Up close, I could see that it wasn't completely featureless. There were subtle shifts in the darkness, like swirling shadows. And somewhere in that swirling void, I caught a glimmer of something that might have been eyes. A voice filled my head, though I couldn't tell if I was hearing it or just thinking it. It was ancient and echoing, like wind through an empty cavern. "You've been watching me, Michael," it said. "Now I'm watching you." I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came out. The figure reached out, a tendril of shadow extending towards me. I felt an icy coldness brush against my cheek, and then the lights flickered on. I blinked, momentarily blinded by the sudden brightness. When my eyes adjusted, the figure was gone. I was alone in the food court, my flashlight lying on the floor where I'd dropped it. My radio crackled to life, making me jump. "Mike, Mike, are you there?" It was Jenny from dispatch, sounding worried. With shaking hands, I raised the radio to my lips. "Why, yeah, Jenny, I'm here. Thank God," she said, relief evident in her voice. "We got an alert that the emergency lights had been triggered in the food court. Is everything okay?" I looked around the empty food court, still half expecting to see the shadowy figure lurking in a corner. But there was nothing out of the ordinary, just tables, chairs, and the early morning light starting to peek through the windows. "Everything's fine," I lied, my voice steadier than I felt. Must have been a glitch in the system. I'll write it up in my report. After assuring Jenny once more that all was well, I made my way back to the security office on shaky legs. As I settled into my chair, my eyes were immediately drawn to the monitor showing the fountain. The figure was back, standing in its usual spot. But now, it was facing the camera, watching me. I don't know what I saw that night. A ghost, a demon, a manifestation of my own fears. I couldn't say. What I do know is that I'm not alone during these long night shifts anymore. And I'm not sure if that's a comfort or a curse. Every night, I come to work, settle into my chair, and look at that screen. And every night, it's there, waiting for me. Sometimes it moves. Sometimes it doesn't, but it's always watching. And sometimes, in the quietest hours of the night, I hear that voice again, echoing in my mind. "You've been watching me, Michael. Now I'm watching you." I've thought about quitting, about running away and never looking back. But somehow, I know it wouldn't matter. Whatever this thing is, it's found me, and I have a feeling it's not letting go anytime soon. So I sit and I watch and I wait. Because in this strange game we're playing, I'm no longer sure who's the security guard and who's the intruder. All I know is that the night shift at Pinewood Mall will never be the same again. The car had been there for hours, a silent sentinel under the harsh fluorescent lights of the gas station. As the night wore on, a gnawing feeling in my gut told me something wasn't right. Little did I know, approaching that vehicle would change everything. My name's Jack, and I've been working the graveyard shift at Pete's Gas and Go for about 3 years now. It's a small place just off the highway, the kind of joint where truckers and late-night travelers stop for coffee and a quick fill-up. Most nights are quiet, with only the occasional drunk or lost tourist to break up the monotony. But this night was different. It started around 10 p.m. when a beat-up sedan pulled into pump number 3. Nothing unusual about that. We get all sorts of vehicles here. The driver filled up, and I figured they'd be on their way. But they didn't leave. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe they were catching a nap before hitting the road again. It happens sometimes, especially with long-haul drivers. But as the hours ticked by and the car remained motionless, that uneasy feeling started to creep in. By 2 a.m., I couldn't ignore it anymore. The car hadn't moved an inch, and I hadn't seen any sign of movement from the driver. I tried to focus on my other tasks, restocking the coolers, mopping the floors, anything to keep my mind off that damn car. But my eyes kept drifting back to it, drawn like a magnet. At 3 a.m., I decided I had to check it out. I've been staring at this car for 5 hours now, and the suspense was killing me. Worst case scenario, I'd wake up a sleepy driver and send them on their way. Best case, well, I tried not to think about what the best case might be. I stepped out from behind the counter, the bell above the door jingling as I pushed it open. The night air was cool and damp, a light fog rolling in from the nearby fields. The only sounds were the soft hum of the pumps and the distant whoosh of cars on the highway. As I approached the car, my heart started to race. Up close, I could see it was in worse shape than I thought. The paint was peeling, and there were rust spots along the wheel wells. The windows were fogged up, making it impossible to see inside. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "Hello," I called out, tapping lightly on the driver's side window. No response. I cupped my hands around my eyes, trying to peer through the foggy glass. I could make out a shape in the driver's seat. Someone slumped over the steering wheel. "Hey, are you all right in there?" I called louder, knocking on the window with more force. Still nothing. A chill ran down my spine. Something was very wrong here. I reached for the door handle, half expecting it to be locked. To my surprise, it opened easily. The interior light flickered on, and I had to stifle a gasp. The person, a man I could see now, was still slumped over the wheel. But what made my blood run cold was the dark, sticky substance matting his hair and covering the steering wheel. Blood. There was no mistaking it. I stood there, frozen, my mind racing. Should I call the police? An ambulance? Was he even still alive? Before I could decide what to do, I saw it. A slight movement. The man's head, ever so slowly, began to turn towards me. My heart felt like it was going to burst out of my chest. I wanted to run, to slam the door shut and pretend I'd never opened it. But I was rooted to the spot, unable to look away. The man's face came into view, and I had to bite back a scream. His features were barely recognizable under the mask of blood. But his eyes were open, staring directly at me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. For a moment, neither of us moved. We just stared at each other, this bloody stranger and me, locked in a surreal tableau under the harsh lights of the gas station. Then he spoke. His voice was a raspy whisper, barely audible over the ambient noise of the night. "Help me." Those two words snapped me out of my paralysis. Whatever had happened to this man, he needed help and fast. I fumbled for my cell phone, my hands shaking so badly I could barely dial 911. As I waited for the call to connect, I tried to assess the situation. The man was conscious, which was a good sign, but there was so much blood. It covered his face, his clothes, the steering wheel, the dashboard. How was he even still alive? 911. "What's your emergency?" The operator's calm voice in my ear was like a lifeline to sanity. "I need an ambulance at Pete's Gas and go off Highway 16, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "There's a man here, he's hurt bad. There's a lot of blood." As I relayed the details to the operator, I kept my eyes on the man in the car. He hadn't moved again since speaking, but his eyes remained fixed on me. There was something in that gaze that unsettled me deeply. It wasn't just pain or fear I saw there. There was something else, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. The operator assured me help was on the way and instructed me to stay with the victim if it was safe to do so. I nodded, forgetting for a moment that she couldn't see me, and ended the call. "Help is coming," I told the man, trying to sound reassuring. "Just hang in there, okay?" He didn't respond. He just kept staring at me with those unsettling eyes. I don't know how long we stayed like that, me standing awkwardly by the open car door, him sitting motionless, our eyes locked in a bizarre staring contest. It felt like hours, but it couldn't have been more than a few minutes before I heard the distant wail of sirens. As the sound grew closer, I saw something change in the man's eyes. A flicker of panic? He started to move, struggling to sit up straight. "Hey! Take it easy," I said, reaching out instinctively to steady him. The ambulance is almost here. You're going to be okay. His hand shot out, grabbing my wrist with surprising strength. His skin was ice cold, and I had to fight the urge to recoil. No, he rasped, his bloodied face inches from mine. No ambulance. No police. You have to help me. Hide me. I stared at him, dumbfounded. What? No. You need medical attention. You're hurt bad, man. His grip on my wrist tightened and I winced. You don't understand, he hissed. They'll find me. They'll finish the job. A chill ran through me. Who? Who did this to you? But before he could answer, the ambulance rounded the corner, its lights painting the gas station in alternating red and white. The man's eyes widened in fear. Please, he begged, his voice barely a whisper now. If they find me, I'm dead. And you'll be next. I stood there, frozen in indecision. The rational part of my brain was screaming at me to step back, to let the professionals handle this. But something in his eyes, the raw fear and desperation, made me hesitate. The ambulance pulled up and 2 paramedics jumped out, rushing towards us with a stretcher. In that moment, I made a decision that would haunt me for years to come. I helped the man out of the car, supporting his weight as he stumbled to his feet. To the approaching paramedics, I called out, "False alarm. My buddy here had a bit too much to drink. Fell and hit his head, but he's okay. Just gonna get him cleaned up." The paramedics slowed their approach, looking skeptical. "Sir, we got a call about a serious injury. Are you sure everything's all right?" I forced a laugh, trying to sound casual despite the panic rising in my throat. "Yeah, sorry about that. I panicked when I saw all the blood. Head wounds, you know? They always look worse than they are. He's fine. Just needs to sleep it off." They didn't look convinced, but after a few more assurances and a mumbled apology from my mysterious friend, they reluctantly packed up and left. As their taillights disappeared down the road, I turned to the bloodied stranger leaning heavily against me. "All right," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "You've got some explaining to do. Who are you, and what the hell is going on?" He looked at me, his eyes now filled with a mix of gratitude and something else, something that sent a shiver down my spine. "Thank you," he said softly. "You've just saved both our lives. But I'm afraid this is only the beginning." As I helped him into the gas station, leaving a trail of bloody footprints in our wake, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just made a terrible mistake. That by choosing to help this stranger, I'd stepped into a world I knew nothing about. A world of danger, secrets, and things that went bump in the night. Little did I know, that night at the gas pump was just the beginning of a journey that would change my life forever. A journey into a darkness I never knew existed, lurking just beneath the surface of our everyday world. But in that moment, all I could do was clean up the blood, listen to his story, and wonder what the hell I'd gotten myself into. The night shift at Pete's Gas and Go would never be the same again. The phone rang again, its shrill tone cutting through the quiet hum of the diner. I knew who it was before I even picked up. The same caller, asking for the same person, night after night. But this time, something was different. This time, Lucy walked through the door. "My name's Donna, and I've been working the night shift at the Starlight Diner for longer than I care to admit. It's a 24-hour joint just off the interstate. The kind of place where truckers and insomniacs come and nurse a cup of coffee and escape their thoughts for a while. Most nights, it's just me, the cook, and a handful of regulars. But lately, things have been strange. It started about a month ago. A call would come in, always between 2 and 3 a.m. The voice on the other end, always male, always slightly distorted, would ask for Lucy. No last name, just Lucy. At first, I thought it was a wrong number. I'd politely explained that there was no Lucy here, and that would be that. But the calls kept coming. Night after night, same time, same question. "Is Lucy there?" I'd explain again and again that we had no Lucy. Sometimes the caller would hang up immediately. Other times, he'd stay on the line, breathing heavily, before disconnecting. I mentioned it to my boss, thinking maybe we should report it, but he just shrugged it off. Probably some lonely guy with nothing better to do, he said. Just ignore it. So I tried, but as the weeks went by, the calls started to change. The caller began to leave messages for Lucy, cryptic things like, tell her the crow flies at midnight, or she knows what she did in Reno. It was unsettling, to say the least. Then last night, things took a turn. The call came in as usual, but this time, the voice was different, urgent, almost panicked. Lucy needs to know, it said. They're coming for her. Tell her to run. I hung up, my hand shaking slightly. This was getting out of hand. I made up my mind to call the police in the morning. Caller ID be damned. But then, at precisely 3:15 a.m., the bell above the door chimed. I looked up from wiping down the counter, and my heart nearly stopped. She was average height, with long dark hair and pale skin. She wore a red dress that seemed out of place in our humble diner, and her eyes darted nervously around the room. But what really caught my attention was the name tag pinned to her dress. It read, simply, Lucy. Our eyes met, and for a moment, neither of us moved. Then, almost in a whisper, she said, I heard you've been getting calls about me. My mind was reeling. How did she know? Who was she? And most importantly, what the hell was going on? I gestured to an empty booth, trying to keep my voice steady. Why don't you have a seat? I'll get you some coffee. Lucy slid into the booth, her eyes never leaving me. I poured a cup of coffee with shaking hands and brought it over to her. As I set it down, I noticed her hands. They were trembling too. So, I said, sliding into the seat across from her, you want to tell me what's going on? Lucy took a sip of coffee, wincing slightly at the heat. It's complicated, she said, and dangerous. You shouldn't be involved. I leaned back, crossing my arms. Well, I'm already involved, aren't I? I've been getting these calls for weeks. I think I deserve some answers. She sighed, running a hand through her hair. You're right. I'm sorry. I never meant for anyone else to get caught up in this. Just then, the phone rang. We both jumped, our eyes locking on the old rotary phone behind the counter. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Are you going to answer that? Lucy asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I shook my head. Not this time. This time, you're going to tell me what's going on. She nodded, taking a deep breath. It started about 6 months ago. I was working as a data analyst for a big tech company. Nothing exciting, just crunching numbers. But one day, I noticed something strange in the data. Patterns that didn't make sense. Transactions that shouldn't exist. The phone kept ringing, an incessant backdrop to her story. I dug deeper, thinking it was just a glitch. But the more I looked, the worse it got. Money laundering, insider trading, connections to some very dangerous people. I realized I had stumbled onto something big, something that could bring down not just a company, but some very powerful individuals. She paused, taking another sip of coffee. Her hands were steadier now, as if telling the story was somehow calming her. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't just ignore it, but I knew going to my superiors wasn't an option. So I gathered as much evidence as I could and went to the FBI. The ringing finally stopped, leaving the diner in an eerie silence. At first, they were skeptical, but as they investigated, they realized I was right. They promised me protection, a new identity, but somehow, word got out. Someone knew I had talked. A chill ran down my spine. The phone calls... Lucy nodded. They were warnings at first, telling me to back off, to recant my statement. But I couldn't. I had come too far. And tonight, I asked, dreading the answer. Tonight, I got word that they had found me. My FBI contact told me to run, that they couldn't protect me anymore. I've been driving all night, no real destination in mind. Then I saw this place, and I don't know. Something told me to stop. I sat back, trying to process everything. It sounded like something out of a movie, not the kind of thing that happened in real life. Certainly not the kind of thing that happened at the Starlight Diner. So what now? I asked. Lucy shrugged, a sad smile on her face. I don't know. Keep running, I guess. Hope that the FBI can build their case before they find me. I was about to respond when headlights swept across the parking lot. A black SUV pulled up, its engine a low growl in the quiet night. Lucy's face went pale. "Oh, God," she whispered. "They're here." I acted on instinct. "Quick," I said, grabbing her arm. "In the kitchen." We rushed through the swinging doors just as the bell above the entrance chimed. I could hear heavy footsteps, at least 2 sets, entering the diner. "Stay here," I whispered to Lucy, who nodded, her eyes wide with fear. I stepped back out into the dining area. 2 men in dark suits stood by the counter, their eyes scanning the room. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. The taller of the 2 turned to me, his face expressionless. "We're looking for someone. A woman. Dark hair, red dress. Have you seen her?" I shook my head, hoping my face didn't betray me. "Sorry, it's been a quiet night. No one matching that description has been in." He stared at me for a long moment, and I felt like he could see right through me. Then, without a word, he nodded to his companion and they left, the bell chiming their exit. I waited until I saw the SUV pull away before rushing back to the kitchen. Lucy was huddled in the corner, tears streaming down her face. "They're gone," I said softly. "For now." She looked up at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and fear. "Thank you," she whispered. "But why? Why are you helping me?" I thought about it for a moment. Why was I risking my neck for a stranger? A stranger who had brought danger right to my doorstep? Because, I said finally, in all my years working here, I've learned one thing. Everyone who comes through that door has a story. And sometimes, they just need someone to listen, to help, even if it's just for one night. Lucy stood up, wiping her eyes. "I can't stay here. They'll come back." I nodded. "I know. But let me help you. I've got a car out back. We can get you out of here. Somewhere safe." She looked at me, surprise evident on her face. "You'd do that for me." I smiled, surprising myself with my own certainty. "Yeah, I would. Look, I don't know much about corporate espionage or FBI investigations, but I do know about helping people who need it. And right now, you need it." For the first time since she walked in, Lucy smiled. A real smile, one that reached her eyes. "Thank you," she said softly. As we snuck out the back door, the diner phone started ringing again. But this time, we let it ring. Whatever messages were being left, whatever warnings or threats, they didn't matter anymore. Because sometimes, in the dead of night, in a little 24-hour diner off the interstate, you find more than just a cup of coffee and a sympathetic ear. Sometimes, you find a lifeline, and sometimes, you become one. As we drove off into the night, leaving the Starlight Diner and its ringing phone behind, I couldn't help but wonder what tomorrow would bring. But for now, we were just 2 unlikely allies, outrunning the darkness 1 mile at a time. The night shift would never be the same again. But then again, neither would I. The sound of meat slapping against metal echoed through the empty supermarket, a wet thud that sent shivers down my spine. I froze, my hand hovering over a box of cereal I'd been about to restock. That noise didn't belong here, not at 3 a.m. in a locked-up store. But it was what I saw next that turned my blood to ice, a trail of bloody handprints leading to the meat department freezer. My name's Alex, and I've been working the overnight shift at Super Save for about 6 months now. It's usually a quiet gig. Restock the shelves, mop the floors, and try not to fall asleep standing up. But tonight was different. It started off normal enough. I clocked in at 11 p.m., nodded to the closing manager as he left, and got to work. The store was eerily quiet, just the soft hum of refrigerators and the occasional beep from the security system. I kind of liked it that way. No customers, no drama, just me and the endless aisles of groceries. I was about halfway through my shift when I first noticed something off. I was restocking the dairy section when I caught a whiff of something wrong. It was metallic and sharp, cutting through the usual smell of cleaning products and cardboard. I wrinkled my nose, figuring maybe some milk had gone bad and leaked. But as I moved through the store, the smell got stronger. By the time I reached the cereal aisle, it was overwhelming. That's when I heard it, that wet, meaty sound coming from the back of the store. My first instinct was to call out, to see if maybe another employee had snuck in for some reason. But the words died in my throat as I rounded the corner and saw those handprints. They were unmistakable, dark red against the white linoleum floor, leading straight to the meat department. I should have called the police right then, should have run out of the store, and never looked back. But curiosity, or maybe stupidity, got the better of me. I followed the trail, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The meat department was dark, the overhead lights off to save energy overnight. I fumbled for the light switch, my sweaty hands slipping on the plastic. When the fluorescents flickered to life, I almost wished they hadn't. The place was a mess. Packages of ground beef and steak were strewn across the floor, some torn open, their contents spilled out like gory confetti. And there, right in the center of it all, was the freezer door. It was closed, but I could see more of those bloody handprints smeared across its stainless steel surface. I stood there, frozen, my mind racing. What the hell was going on? Had someone broken in? Was there an injured person trapped in the freezer? Or was it something worse? I took a step forward, then another, my shoes sticking slightly to the blood-smeared floor. I reached out, my hand trembling, and grasped the freezer door handle. It was ice cold against my skin, a stark contrast to the warmth of the blood. I hesitated for a moment, every horror movie I'd ever seen flashing through my mind. But I had to know. I had to see what was inside. I pulled the door open. For a second, all I saw was the usual. Hanging sides of beef, boxes of frozen chicken. Nothing out of the ordinary. Then something moved in the back corner, a dark shape shifting in the shadows. "Hello," I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. "Is someone there?" The shape moved again, faster this time. I caught a glimpse of pale skin, of eyes reflecting the light like an animal's. Then it lunged. I stumbled backward, my feet slipping in the blood on the floor. I fell hard. The wind knocked out of me as I hit the ground. And there, crouched over me, was something. It looked human, or at least it had once. But its skin was a sickly gray, stretched tight over protruding bones. Its mouth was too wide, filled with sharp, yellow teeth. And its eyes, God, its eyes were completely black, like empty pits in its face. I screamed. I couldn't help it. The sound tore from my throat, echoing off the tiled walls of the meat department. The creature recoiled at the noise, hissing like a cat. It gave me just enough time to scramble to my feet and run. I didn't look back, didn't stop to grab anything. I just ran, my heart pounding in my ears, the squelch of my bloodied shoes on the floor the only other sound. I made it to the front of the store in record time, fumbling with my keys to unlock the main doors. I could hear it behind me, a wet slapping sound as it pursued. Just as I got the door open, I felt something grab my ankle. I kicked out blindly, feeling my foot connect with something solid. There was a shriek, inhuman and filled with pain, and the grip on my ankle loosened. I didn't waste the opportunity. I burst out of the store into the cool night air, running across the empty parking lot to my car. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. But finally, the engine roared to life, and I peeled out of the parking lot, tires squealing on the asphalt. As I sped away, I glanced in my rearview mirror. There, Standing in the open doorway of the supermarket was a creature. It wasn't pursuing me anymore. It just stood there, watching me go with those pitch-black eyes. I drove for hours, no real destination in mind, just trying to put as much distance between me and the store as possible. When the sun finally started to rise, I pulled over at a rest stop, my hand still shaking on the steering wheel. What the hell had I just experienced? My mind raced through possibilities, each more outlandish than the last. A escaped mental patient? Some kind of mutant? A honest-to-God monster? I looked down at myself, at my clothes stained with blood that wasn't mine, at my hands still sticky with it. This was real. This had happened. I knew I should call someone, the police, my boss, anybody, but who would believe me? I could barely believe it myself, and I'd lived through it. As the morning wore on and more people started to fill the rest stop, I made a decision. I couldn't go back. Not to the store, not to my apartment, not to my old life. Whatever I'd seen in that freezer, whatever had chased me, it had changed everything. I used the rest stop's bathroom to clean up as best I could, throwing my ruined work shirt in the trash. Then I got back in my car and started driving again. No particular destination in mind, just away. It's been 3 days now. I'm in a small motel room, writing this all down while I try to figure out what to do next. I've seen the news reports. A break-in at the Super Save, evidence of some kind of animal attack. They're calling it a bear, if you can believe it, as if a bear could open a freezer door, could leave bloody handprints. I know the truth. I saw it with my own eyes, felt its cold grip on my ankle. There are things out there, things that shouldn't exist, things that hunt in the dark, that hide in plain sight. And now I can't help but wonder, how many other night shift workers have seen what I've seen? How many others have encountered things that don't belong in our world? And how many of them weren't lucky enough to get away? I don't know what I'm going to do now. I can't go back to my old life, that's for sure. But I can't just ignore what happened either. Maybe I need to find others like me. Other people who've seen the things that lurk in the shadows of our supposedly safe, normal world. Because one thing's for certain, I'll never look at a supermarket the same way again. And I'll definitely never work another night shift. The darkness holds secrets, terrors that most people couldn't even imagine. And now that I've seen them, I can never unsee them. So if you're reading this, if you've had your own encounter with the unexplainable, know that you're not alone. There are things out there, things that defy explanation, and some of us have looked them in the eye and lived to tell the tale. Just remember, the next time you're alone in a seemingly empty building and you hear a sound that doesn't belong, run, and don't look back. Because you never know what might be lurking in the shadows, waiting for its chance to strike. The night shift will never be the same again, and neither will I.